And so, Peter, if I can turn to you next.
Yes, I mean, I started off with Blake and remain fascinated with him, one of the key thinkers and radical, non-canonical thinkers about imagination. And that also got me interested in Romanticism and contemporary culture, and in large part because the reception of Blake is largely a 20th century and even the second half of the 20th century phenomenon. By the middle of the 19th century, being completely forgotten. So he's entangled, his reception is entangled with our own interests. And from that, I got interested in Gothic fictions, in histories of virtual reality, architecture, and the way space shapes our imagination and our thoughts. So, and again, I was Associate Dean of Information Technology and Multimedia and quite a few years ago. And sitting there, everyone sounded like romantics. You know, like you could hear the echoes of late 18th, early 19th century views of the imagination. So that's really become one of my main interests and one of my teaching interests is looking at the relationship between 18th and 19th century notions of the imagination and the contemporary. So for me, and I'll explain in a minute my path to this particular project, I was just fascinated by the way in which they were complex, distinctive, and close to some of our most important values, but clearly not universal, and that they were also things that were closely tied up with questions of colonialism and with questions of dispossession and so on. So, whoa, you know, this is enough to occupy one for quite some time. Let me quickly look. 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to tell you what's so fascinating, why you get interested in Romanticism. Histories of imagination in Europe go back to Hellenic and Hebrew. They're really long, but there's a modern notions, and by modern I mean modern Western notions of the imagination, really only come into being in the late 18th century. Up until then, and now this isn't reenactment, it's something quite different, is a reproductive imagination. It reproduces sensory experience, so it's mimetic. I mean, in the West, there is no creativity as we understand it. Now, that's clearly not completely true, but let's just live with that for a minute. Until the late 18th century, what happens then is just fascinating. There's the discovery of the productive imagination, you know, which is this unconscious power that shapes the world that we live in. You know, not the actual world, not the real world, but the life world, which intersects with that. So Wordsworth talks about us as both perceiving and creating the world. Is this immersive interaction with the world. But then, and it's from there. And then the second thing that happens is that there's the discovery of what Kant calls an aesthetic imagination, but it's also a radical imagination, which is simply the power to veer from the given, and, you know, to create something new that's not there in the world, even though it might have been made out of things in the world. So already as a young person, I'm kind of astonished at that, because with the productive imagination, you can see, you know, again, modern Western notions that human perception, but also myths, also language, kind of shape the world that we live in. But also in the radical imagination, you can see modern notions of innovation, originality, but also things to do with agency. And moving quickly, this is tied up with another thing, which is a re-evaluation of reason. You know, reason is often that which sort of subject, object, oculocentric, all of those sorts of things. Imagination is also, but in contrast, for the Romantics, late 18th, early 19th century, it's imagination which is crucial, which links you into this, into the actual world, and it's that which it's the imagination links you to the actual world. It's then connected with the body. It's connected with, as Richard Kearney would say, things to do with touch. It's connected with community and interaction. And this is the next point. It's there that notions about the link between creativity, the body, and well-being have their beginning. Romanticism is full of narratives about the therapeutic value of imagination, the thing is that this is sometimes presented as universal, and it's clearly not. Again, moving really, really quickly because I've already used up 3 or 4 minutes. These sorts of things appear against the background of a revolutionary move against hierarchical, aristocratic cultures and a move towards democracy. So in this work, the West is trying to find an understanding of self and community which is open to the future. And then it also happens against the background of their version of global war, the French Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars, which go all the way from 1792 to 1815, which are the world's first example of total war. So the picture is complicated by this sense that this subject with agency in a community that's democratic and open is impossible. So again, fascinating to me because you can see the beginning of 19th and 20th century sociology, which basically picks up those sorts of questions. So the thing is, and here I'm going to quickly end by turning it round, this introduces a heap of problems for me, but which are maybe only in my head. The first one, as an academic, is Western notions of imagination are actually really, really diverse. You know, are we talking about, while conforming to the history that I've just said, are we talking about a commanding imagination, which is Napoleon, where you impose your vision on the world? Or is it a different kind of imagination which could live with uncertainties? Is it immersion in the world, so that many people see modern eco-criticism as beginning with Romanticism, or is it egotism? Is it the person? Is Romanticism, is imagination about self-affirmation? Is imaginary work merely compensation for the trauma of the Napoleonic Wars, or is it an active engagement? And all of those views are argued out within Romanticism. That's the first problem. You know, we can dispatch that fairly easily for everyone except for me. The second thing, though, is, and this is a kind of a trauma that's felt in particular in settler societies, I think. I mean, an occupying trauma is that you can just see, you know, its description has suggested that things to do with democracy, with agency, with freedom, with therapy are connected to values that we might in various forms hold dear, but they're also closely connected with colonialism, because what they do is they lay the cultural foundations for a settler subject who's able to build a new world in or with the material left by the ruin of the old. This is this extraordinary turn, which in a series of what for me were formative studies I did in the first decade of this century, you can see explored through, particularly through the work of David Malouf. And it's absolutely fascinating. He's a person who you read once, and The Imaginary Life or Fly Away Peter, you read it and you think, gee, that's a fantastic illustration of the romantic imagination. And yet in both of those, and this is what I've found fascinating writing about, that view of imagination is closely connected with dispossession, and you can trace in a really amazing way. So so you can clearly see from this. One more thing, so the imagination then turns out to be negative. And what it is, so the question is, can the imagination make you sick? And I don't mean, well, does imagination make you mad? It's, does it unwrite forms of social imaginaries which are destructive? And that's one of the reasons that I got so interested in Blake, because for Blake, the imagination for much of his oeuvre is really negative, because it underwrites discrimination, dispossession, and I guess it's this notion of it's that then which that sequence that leads me to this project, that I just think it's really important that we don't think that that European notion of imagination is universal. You know, it's distinctive. It has its own histories, and it's deeply tied up with moral, ethical, historical trauma and difficulties. And it seems to be that it's really important, and this is what I really like and have found so inspiring about this project. It's really important to bring it into dialogue with other understandings of the imagination, which act in a way as a critique of the Western tradition, but also enable it to muster its own resources to transform itself.